Hello everyone, happy Friday. Welcome to yet another Brain Scratch. I'm John Lorden, and today we're going to be going back into the case of Brandon Lawson. And this video is going to be a little bit different because a lot of the research that we're going to cover was done by me in terms of phone calls with the family, and I didn't quite expect that to happen. Honestly, they reached out to me as soon as the first video was posted, and a few of them just wanted to thank me for featuring him. There's been a bit of frustration around the lack of media coverage in terms of Brandon's case, which we're going to talk about a bit later. And there's also, this is a bit different for me because now we're moving into areas of discussion and topics that could be based on fact, could be based more on people's opinions or viewpoints. So I'm going to do my best to really point out where we are talking about a person's opinion versus certain hard facts. That being said, there are a couple of new pieces of information that have come out about this case. It's almost a strange coincidence, like I don't know, like the universe is kind of knocking on this case. There's even a brand new news story that has come out about it, and we're going to go into all that. I spoke to 3 of Brandon's family, and we're going to talk about my conversation with each of them. I spoke to his cousin Anthony, I spoke to his father Bradley, and I spoke to his girlfriend, or as some people call her, the common law wife, Ledessa, mother of 3 of his children. And it is worth noting, I didn't have a clear understanding of this in the first video, but there is a 4th child of Brandon's that was from a previous relationship, Mackenzie, and she is still very much part of the family. She still comes over to visit the other 3 kids. And I've heard that, in particular, I think the girls have watched my first Brain Scratch, which in one way I was kind of flattered by, but in another way really gave me a strong dose of, hey John, you know, that line that I constantly try to tread of being fair and honest about things is more important now than ever, that I'm doing these types of stories in terms of missing people, and on, of course, my new show, Brain Scratch Searchlight. So let's get started looking back into the case of Brandon. First of all, there was a lot of feedback that I've seen around this, and I got a little bit of it in the comments for my first video on Brandon. Some people seem to have an intuition that they want to discount Brandon because he may have had a past with drug use. And in particular, these comments aren't worded very friendly. They're very abrupt. They seem a little bit mean-spirited. And I have some trouble with people that are looking to discount other people simply because they either have a past of drug use or even if they currently are using drugs. So I pulled up this quick little Google search on the percentage of Americans abusing drugs. And here it says that in 2013, an estimated 24.6 million Americans aged 12 or older, 9.4% of the population had used an illicit drug in the past month. So that is nearly 1 in 10. And the reason why I'm raising this point is for those of you that want to discount people because they might have a past or have some touch into this area that you don't quite understand. The fact of the matter is someone in your family does understand it. As a matter of fact, if you consider all your close friends and family and that number exceeds 10, you probably have one of them that is using some type of illicit narcotic. Not everyone struggles with it in the same way. Not everyone is open and honest about that. So you might not even know that it's occurring in your family. But if your family is more than 10 people, chances are pretty high that it is occurring. So I ask that anyone that has that quick disposition, that kind of there is a need that some of us have to solve these cases, and sometimes we want to do that by disassociating from the person, and using this as an excuse to disassociate from the person is not a really good excuse. I challenge people in that mindset to look past that, look deeper, and look at how you would feel if this was your family member that had gone missing and other people are trying to help the search, is it really worth you adding a comment that, this is just someone that's using drugs and, got what they deserved, or we shouldn't be wasting time covering this? Personally, I don't believe that. And I think I could speak for a lot of the brain scratchers out there who probably agree with me. It's not a good reason to throw anyone away. So just wanted to start with that. There was coverage. Here's a great picture of Brandon and Ledessa. And this is a new article written by Brittany Clark. And this is on sanangelolive.com. And essentially, it's an article. It's got a great title: Life Goes On After Brandon Lawson's Disappearance, but Questions Remain. On top of having a bunch of really good photographs of Brandon and his family in happier times, it really kind of chases down the question of what is going on with Ledessa. How is she possibly moving forward from this? I can tell you, after speaking to her personally, it's funny, I was speaking to her the same day that Brittany was actually contacting her for this. It's very hard to move on. I don't think, in my opinion of the conversation I had with Ledessa, I don't think she is able to move on at this point. Brandon's disappearance and the actions around keeping awareness up around that, holding annual events like balloon releases and candlelight vigils, that is a part of this woman's life. On top of that, she is raising 3 children that she had with him. She's working full time. So it's a very tough position to be in. That being said, I was really inspired by her sense of energy and dedication to doing what she had to do. I tried to tell her at the end of the phone call in particular, there is truly an inspirational feeling that you get when you talk to someone that has faced these things and you hear the steps that they're taking to keep this whole big machine moving, again, basically swimming upstream. She is not, at least in terms of my conversation with her, she is not getting the best support that I think she could be from the local law enforcement. We're going to cover some of that in specific detail. It's not a huge community out there. So, for example, this article mentions that, another article that we're going to talk about in a second mentions that on the weekend he went missing, only about 20 to 30 people got together for the search. Now, in a major metropolitan area like Los Angeles, when we have someone go missing, if it's a high-profile enough case, there will typically be hundreds of people that get together to conduct a search like that. So it's in a bit of a different vein in Texas, and Ledessa really noted that there is a pretty big cultural difference just from San Angelo to Bront. San Angelo, you're talking about a community of nearly 100,000 people, and Bront, you're talking about a community of less than 1,000 people. And I know I've already commented in terms of, the sheriff being married to the person that owns the newspaper. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but just think of that small town mentality, and it kind of puts this whole case in a different light, and you really start to wonder, have enough resources been dedicated to finding Brandon? And I can tell you, after the conversations I've had with his family, I don't know that has occurred. I kind of feel strongly that it hasn't. So I'm happy in some small way to help contribute to that. Very good article written by Brittany here. I highly recommend you read it for yourselves. Like I said, there's some great pictures, a lot of great information. One thing in particular, here we go, was Brandon really a drug dealer? I believe, from what I've been told by the family members that I spoke to, he had a past in this area, but he was coming clear of it. As a matter of fact, specifically, his father told me that Brandon had just passed a drug test for his new job that he was to start. I think it was the Monday following his disappearance. He also mentioned that he had new uniforms in the truck for that new job. So was he actively, currently using drugs or dealing drugs. I kind of highly doubt it. Ledessa points out in this article, this is a guy that's working 95 hours a week, very physical labor. I heard that him and Kyle actually moved to this area together. Apparently they're very, very close siblings, and I don't know if it was Kyle that led Brandon there or Brandon that led Kyle, but one of them helped the other come out to that area and get started in the oil industry as kind of a clean, fresh start. His cousin spoke to me specifically about a comment that Brandon had made to him when they were playing golf one day, that Brandon just couldn't believe how much he was enjoying his sobriety, that he was really enjoying being able to go out and play golf as opposed to get high and just waste the whole day away. So it's very clear. His family was super clear about this with me, and quite honestly, they were so honest even about their own pasts and stuff. I have no reason to doubt it. He had a past in this area, yes. Seems like he was cleaning it up and trying to move forward. And one of them even told me that the warrant for his arrest, they were confused by. He thought it was for time he had already served on that previous charge. So, and that is not unheard of with warrants. Sometimes this system, doesn't work perfectly, and you need to go get in front of a judge, and the judge figures out, oh, this is for time already served, that warrant is dismissed. That's not something that a police officer can determine, especially on the spot if, they've just pulled someone over. All that being said, Ledessa pointed out very accurately, they were not hiding. They had a public address. Police could have come by any time to serve that warrant for his arrest. This was not a person that was in hiding, and the warrant was years old. So there's aspects of that story. People are really interested in that nugget of information. Once again, I think they're trying to look to that information to maybe discount Brandon or put together a story of him at a drug deal gone bad or something like that. The facts of this case, at least from where I'm sitting, do not support that. This guy ran out of gas. We know he ran out of gas. They confirmed the gas tank was empty. Specifically, in terms of the gas station, I had several commenters that were picking up pieces of information that made it sound like there was a gas station close to where Brandon had pulled off the side of the road. From what I've been able to research, just hitting up a Google search here on the map and pulling up local gas stations, this coincides exactly with what I was told by Ledessa. There are gas stations in San Angelo. There is nothing for gas stations on the 227 until you get to Bront. And this is a confirmation. Right here we can see Stripes, which is one of their local gas chains here. And if you head up the 227, we've got nothing all the way until you get into Bront, and then you have Stripes, and across from it you have West Texas Gas. So I do believe there was a rest stop within a mile or two of where his truck pulled over, but that wouldn't necessarily have any kind of spare gas service, or might not even be a good place for him to go to in terms of seeking help. Especially if you have a cell phone, you figure you're going to call someone and have someone bring you out what you need. And if they weren't able to get gas that night, for example, if Stripes was closed, let's just take a look at their hours here real quick. Well, apparently that is open 24 hours. But still, there's a possibility that his brother could have been going out just to pick him up, to take him to a gas station, maybe so that Brandon could buy the gas that he needed. Actually, I did bump into a story, not in terms of the interviews, but I bumped into a news clipping somewhere about that there was some reason why Kyle was going to get Brandon before he went to get the gas. I'm pretty sure that's a fit, but I can't remember where the source is right now. So that being said, no gas station on the 227. We can definitely rule out that he was a quarter mile away from the gas station. Before I get into the actual notes from the interviews, there's just one more thing I want to touch on. And first of all, I want to give a huge shout out to Alison Keirsey. If you bump into Alison's comments in any of the episodes of BrainScratch, you're in for a good read. She is very good about doing additional research. She's very good about looking at other aspects of certain facts and talking about them. And she is very active in the comment threads. So I just want to give Alison a huge thank you. When I get my podcast going, I'm pretty sure I know who I'm going to talk to about being a potential guest on that. If not, who knows, maybe even a co-host. Alison does a really good job at unearthing some things like she did here. So from the Facebook page on the Observer Enterprise, she has reposted an article that was written by them. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't say who the author is. I wonder if it's Melinda McCutcheon. I think from what I've seen, there's only 2 people that work at that newspaper. So I think it's highly, highly, highly likely. However, this article goes into specifics that it seems to me can only be known if she was talking directly to law enforcement. Talks a little bit about their procedures, talks a little bit about the past of Brandon Lawson. This is not information I've seen on any of the other news stories. And I just wanted to point out that I know before I talked about a potential conflict of interest in having, the local sheriff married to the person that owns the local newspaper. It just strikes me that it's possible that the person that owns the local newspaper might want an exclusive. That's what newspapers are just clamoring for, and reporters in particular. They always want their exclusive. And there are details in this that I'm telling you have not been replicated anywhere else and couldn't have been given to her without her speaking to law enforcement. I'm making assumptions here, but I believe this is Melinda getting information from her husband. Now, what's the big deal in that, John, you say? Well, I heard from a few of the family members that when press was looking around this case and they were trying to find out more information, they were not being helped by the local sheriff's department. They were not being given information, especially to this level of detail. So does that help or hinder the case? In terms of finding Brandon Lawson, if you have details and you're not releasing them through every channel necessary, I believe that is hindering the case, and that is why these conflicts of interest are so important to understand and address. And quite honestly, in a population of 1,000 people, you might go for 50 years without having a case where it really comes up as this important, but I believe this is the case where it is worth saying. That type of information should not be held exclusive. If he spoke that openly to his wife about this case with the intent of her publicizing it, or someone that works for his wife with the intent of them publicizing it, he should have offered the same courtesy to any reporter that came knocking on the door asking about this case. And from what I've heard, take that with a grain of salt, that is not what happened here. And if you look at the other coverage around this case, I think it's pretty easy to confirm that no one has the details that this article does. So once again, thank you, Alison, for pulling that out. All right, so let's get to the notes. I'm going to do these a little bit out of order of how I spoke to them, but I think it'll just kind of flow a little bit better. I'm starting with my conversation with Bradley Lawson, Brandon's father. And let me just tell you, this is a man that is extremely busted up, that one of his sons is missing. This is a man that was actively doing things to try to find Brandon, and in some cases the local law enforcement, once again, was not being particularly helpful. He repeated to me several times, and I actually had to write it down, he was just trying to bring Brandon home. And if I remember right, I think he said it 3 times in a row, and you could just feel the pain in this man's voice and the sense of frustration. It was really, really heavy. And I so appreciate him going back into this and allowing me to ask questions. Quite honestly, he was just calling to thank me for doing the episode. But he was willing to answer any questions I had. And I think because of that, we've got some good information to share here. One of the things that he heard from the deputies was they would not allow him to conduct searches on someone's private land. Now, in this area, you have to figure it is big, wide open spaces, but there are fences that are up. And the deputies were literally telling him, if you cross that fence, we're going to arrest you. Is that a good form of justice? You know, I kind of see it both ways. I understand that they need to protect the landowners from potential liabilities there. That being said, I think that you could work out waivers, especially for search parties, to be on other people's land. But to hear that, you know, I'd hate to take you to jail today from a deputy because you're looking for your son, that is an extremely hard pill to swallow. And just doesn't seem like the most sensitive way of phrasing that. He told me that they went out, I believe they went out with ATVs and were driving around the perimeter of where the private land was, and the deputy literally pulled out of nowhere and was following them and just tailing them for the day. Hey, I want to make sure that you're not crossing that fence. Better not cross that fence. So just to kind of put it into perspective, like I said, I understand that's private land, but this is a bit different than, you know, crawling a fence or a wall to get into someone's backyard. This is a wide open space. A lot of this space is only used, it's rented out to other people to do hunting on. But that being said, it is privately owned. One of the things he was most frustrated about, and LaDessa honestly too, was they did not want to hear that this was a missing persons case, the law enforcement. They didn't want to look at it that way. And Brandon's vehicle was towed just to get it cleared off the road, and I don't believe it was processed in terms of it potentially being a scene of a crime until they impounded the vehicle. And when they did so, they didn't find any blood, and essentially that is their reasoning for thinking that there is no foul play involved, at least from Bradley's perspective. So just to give you a bit of insight into why the police may have not been treating this as a potential crime scene, for them, they didn't see any evidence of it in or on the interior or exterior of the truck. The rear of the truck was facing out. Contrary to what I've heard from news stories, according to Bradley, it was actually the back end of the truck that was facing out, which if it rolled to a stop after running out of gas, that is a bit more normal and quite honestly believable. The early theory, I asked him, what was their theory? Why would the police take so long to start looking at this as a missing persons case? And the early theory that Bradley quoted to me was that Brandon had some other woman somewhere, and the theory was that she came and picked him up and that he just disappeared with another woman. I think looking back at this now, I think with how much time has passed, with the fact that his bank account has been frozen, his cell phone has never been used again, he gave up his truck, I kind of find that ludicrous. I don't think that's a very viable theory. Was it a good theory for the night that he disappeared? Potentially. Could you let that theory go through another day or two before you start looking at this differently? I would hope that you would look at it differently sooner than that, particularly if it's your job to truly solve crimes. You know, we have a show out here called 48 Hours. There's a good reason it's called that. After the first 48 hours, it becomes even more difficult to find people when they go missing. Brandon was not given a missing persons report, and quite honestly, the family didn't even know about his 911 call until the following Tuesday, and he went missing on Thursday night. So that is quite a bit of time to pass. I mean, there was multiple searches conducted even before he was officially given a missing persons report, and that process started. Worth noting, the sheriff, McCutcheon, was not actually there that weekend, so if any of you have some kind of weird theory that, you know, the sheriff might be involved with this, he was not in the area that particular weekend. And the main message that Bradley kept hearing from law enforcement whenever he would either try to go out to search or speak to them to try to find more answers was, just go home and we'll call you when we find something. I think Bradley's still waiting for that call. One thing that we did discuss was, is there potentially a bit of a cover-up going on here for a liability case? One theory is, if you can think of Brandon jumping a fence and then all of a sudden coming across some harsh terrain and possibly hurting himself, or worse, could the family then sue the owners of the land? I know that there are lawsuits like that that do occur. So that's one thing that we did talk about very briefly, is potentially this could be some type of cover-up for liability. It sure seems like the sheriff's department in particular was working to keep the family out of several privately owned pieces of land. His father was also adamant that the charge that Brandon was facing on that arrest warrant was not something that he would run from. In terms of Brandon's past, that is the type of thing that he faced. This is not, his father literally said, this is a quote, "This little charge is nothing." This is not something that he wouldn't run from this. The last time he spoke to Brandon was actually 10:55 on the night he disappeared. Brandon did call him and told him that he was intending to come out there. His father tried to talk him into actually staying at home, and specifically was telling him, Brandon, just calm down. Why don't you, go sleep with the kids, go lay down by your baby, and just mellow out. However, we know Brandon ultimately wound up leaving. Bradley also did tell me that the terrain out there is very, very tough. It's rough, it's rocky, there's cactus all over the place. So he just wanted to emphasize that this terrain is very, very tough, especially in the dark like that. You could really hurt yourself. All right, so now we're going to move on to my conversation with Ledessa. One of the things that actually a commenter was asking me, had they used drones to search for Brandon? She actually mentioned it before I could ask it, that she was hoping to be able to do that at some point. From what she knew, drones had already been responsible for finding 11 people. She did tell me about the helicopter search. There was a plane search that they had also done. They basically fly over the area. They take photos of everything they're flying over. She said she has thousands of photos. She's poured through them all. It's very, very tough. But when they're up there, essentially they're looking for, either a collection of buzzards. They're looking for something very obvious to grab their attention. And unfortunately, they did have one collection of buzzards that they found, but it was for a dead animal. They really didn't see anything significant like that to draw their attention. I asked her about any upcoming events or memorials. She said absolutely. They're planning another candlelight vigil. And really, the big thing, I was asking if she had tried to file some type of Freedom of Information Act request. You guys know I don't have a lot of enthusiasm for Freedom of Information Act requests, because at least in my experience down here and the research I've done around the LAPD, they don't fulfill those requests here. But I have heard in some other areas where certain police departments are very good about fulfilling those. She is essentially waiting for this case to go cold, which should happen on the 3rd anniversary, which is this year. So in this August, she's hoping this case might get a whole new set of fresh eyes. I believe once it hits cold case, it might get handed off to another department. And then at that point, she might do something like this and attempt to get access to the records that the department has. I really hope she does, and I hope she finds something interesting in them. Once again, we spoke a bit about, I was just asking her, do you feel like the authorities are really helping you in this case? Is this really, are they being helpful? And she noted, if you're an outsider, that she talked about the difference in terms of community. This is a small community. This is a very different way of living, and people from San Angelo might be seen as outsiders to that community. And it was her opinion that if you're an outsider of that close-knit community, they're not as likely to help you. She was specifically told to not be harassing the landowners, and she is speaking to these people in an effort to search their land to find her missing boyfriend, common-law husband. once again, I just have to call out, I wish that there was some type of training, some type of protocol, maybe even special employees that would be interfacing with the families, between the family and the law enforcement units, to try to make that work. Because the way that this went in this case, and I've looked in a lot of other cases where you hear similar things, there's an abruptness to how law enforcement treats communicating with these families that is not helpful. Definitely not helpful to how those families are feeling and what they're dealing with, and I think that can be done better. She also talked about what it was like out there. When she went looking, it's a ton of brush. It's very hard terrain to navigate. Very tough to have a bunch of people walking through, especially, you know, she had family members out there, older people that might have been helping. This is not easy for them to do for prolonged periods of time and to navigate all this. She did once again mention that the hog smell out there is extremely strong, and that apparently was a factor in throwing off the cadaver dogs and their ability to smell. Even in terms of the ping data, I asked her about the ping data, and the phone company she was dealing with, I guess after a certain amount of days, they drop most of the ping data. It kind of thins out to a more simpler set, and by the time they asked for the ping data, it was already at that more simpler set. So they don't have super accurate data. They have kind of a blip on where he was. It was around the Colorado River. His cousin thought that potentially it was from the opposite side of the river, making it sound like Brandon might have crossed the river at some point. But according to Ledessa, the ping areas are very big. They're from 1.5 to 3 miles, and it could have been on either side of the Colorado. I asked Ledessa if she had ever heard the 911 tape from the truck driver. She hasn't. I also asked her how long it took her to get Brandon's 911 tape, and I was pretty surprised to hear it took 4 to 5 months. That's very, very strange to me why it would take so long, particularly in this type of small town. You don't have a lot of the bureaucracy in a smaller town like this, so theoretically things like that should be able to move a bit quicker. So I'm kind of curious about why it took so long. Ledessa said that there have been some new laws that have actually kicked in since Brandon's disappearance. The calls are now routed to Tom Green County. You know, I mentioned in the last video how the dispatcher for 911 worked at a old folks home. That is now all different, and there are laws now specifically about the dispatchers having specific training, which I think is a great thing. I asked Ledessa to just give me an overall timeline of what happened that weekend. She went looking on Friday. She wound up staying in a hotel in Bront. Saturday morning, they went looking again. She was able to collect a bunch of family members together. At this point, she's extremely worried that he might have been bit by a rattlesnake or something like that. But she knows that the first few couple of days are very important because he's likely going to be running out of water if he's injured somewhere, and not having water in that area is extremely bad. She also noted that Brandon had the only truck key. There was only one key for that truck. She didn't have a copy of it. She actually paid for the airplane search, and that happened on Sunday at 5 p.m. You're talking only a few days after, and even before the authorities have taken the missing persons report. So once again, I just have to call out, she really worked hard and fast and a lot to try to figure out what happened to Brandon, particularly in that first weekend. And quite honestly, that work has not stopped. She is still working on this year after year, holding these events, keeping the awareness raised around it. And hopefully someday that'll all pan out for her. I truly, truly hope so. In terms of the police or the law enforcement speaking to press, I kind of asked her about that, and she specifically quoted that she was told they were not going to have a 3-ring circus in this town, and that was part of the reason why law enforcement was not cooperating with members of the media. except for their own wives, apparently. There are no internal affairs departments for the sheriff's department, or for that sheriff's department in particular. I don't know if the Texas Rangers are kind of an oversight to that, or if you have to go even higher, but essentially there's no one for her to complain to about how this case has been treated. What was really bad, in my opinion, is they also reached out to someone that said he was one of the landowners, and he denied them access to search. And then they came out much later to find out he was not the landowner at all. He was simply renting the land from someone else. So you could just see they've had roadblock upon roadblock when it comes to dealing with these landowners. They've been told not to contact the landowners, not to harass these people. I asked Ledessa if she had a waiver for them, for people to conduct a search on the land. She was well aware of all that. She said, yes, we offered everything, and basically they've been given no help. What she is told regularly by these landowners is they'll only allow the search if the Texas Ranger or the Sheriff's Department says it's okay. So you've got the landowners going like this, you've got the law enforcement going like that, and this big gap in the middle is where Brandon is missing, and it sucks. Also worth noting, according to Ledessa, she was told that Kyle actually passed his lie detector. I heard that he was given 4 different lie detector tests, and he has passed them. So I know some people were commenting, thinking that possibly Kyle had something to do with it. I know the law enforcement looked in that direction. Even this most recent article that's posted is quoting someone who's speaking to that effect. But from everything that I've heard from the family, these 2 brothers were extremely close-knit. It does not seem likely to me, just with the conversations I've had, that Kyle was involved in this. And Ledessa specifically says she knows, she was told, that Kyle passed those lie detector tests. So there is, in my mind, there's no suspicion around Kyle for being involved in this. So now we're going to go to the cousin, the phone call I had with the cousin. His name is Anthony Jeffries. And once again, this is someone that was extremely hurt by Brandon's disappearance. He spent a lot of time with Brandon and Kyle when they were young, and he wanted to point some things out. First of all, Brandon was not a tough guy, but he was no stranger to being able to handle himself. He was a strong guy. This is a guy that was working on oil fields. They had experience in terms of wilderness. They used to go stay at their grandfather's and would go out in the wilderness and go shooting and do all kinds of stuff. So there was just some things in terms of the story of Brandon potentially being hurt that Anthony wasn't sure if it would apply, because Brandon was relatively experienced. I asked him if he thought the 911 call was edited, and Anthony is pretty certain it was edited. I asked him how much he thought was edited, and he was kind of unsure, but he thinks it might be even a couple of minutes. And I just wanted to thank the BrainScratch commenters that pointed that out. It is strange that in the version of the 911 call that we've heard, they're not asking him who he is. He's not identifying himself as Brandon Lawson. There's definitely some part of that conversation that's missing. So I kind of believe Anthony when he says that the call was edited. I highly think that call was edited as well. Edited for what reason? I have no idea. I asked Ledessa if she had heard a different version of that call. Apparently there is not a different version of that call. The one that has been released appears to me to be edited. Now Anthony, I asked him about theories. One thing I asked both him and Bradley was, on the phone call, it sounds pretty obvious that Brandon ran into somebody. There was somebody else. He's pretty much calling out that he came upon other people. Why the police have not found those other people, I have no idea. Bradley agrees with it. Anthony agrees with it. Ledessa is a bit different. This is one point where Ledessa, as open as she was in terms of the conversation, she did not want to pontificate on what Brandon may or may have not said. She was clear that he sounded scared, but outside of that, And I think she's doing this for herself personally. She doesn't want to try to imagine all these weird situations or scenarios that he might have been facing. I think for her it feels a little bit safer to possibly feel like he might have hurt himself. We need to find his body and bring him home. But in terms of Bradley and Anthony, they were very clear. It does sound like Brandon came upon someone else. Who is this other person? Anthony had several theories on this. And worth noting, some commenter on the last video included an article about meth in San Angelo, which is a growing problem, and how that's bringing Mexican cartels into the area, because they're not making the meth in San Angelo, it's being made in Mexico and then brought in by these cartels. So one of the things that he mentioned was cartels. He mentioned there's also what is known as the Republic of Texas, which are somewhat backwoods Texans that actually have their own version of the Constitution. They kind of police their own areas, and they even dress up in uniforms when they're policing their own areas. So is it possible that Brandon saw some extremists that were dressed up in these uniforms, thought that they were state troopers, and that's where we get the stroopers part of his voicemail? I can't tell you for sure, but it is something that we spoke about. Anthony said that Brandon was speaking very clearly about marrying Ledessa soon, that essentially he was going to do it as soon as they filed their tax returns for 2014. They had been together just about 10 years, and it sounded like Brandon wanted to finally make that official, according to Anthony. Once again, I think this is the third time from a different family member, Brandon wouldn't run out on his family. He just wouldn't. They are adamant he would not. He was very close with his father, very close with his brother. For him to leave all those people, leave all his resources, just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Anthony specifically said, "I know my cousin's voice, and I have never heard him terrified as much as I heard on that call." So once again, speaking out to whatever was happening to Brandon, whatever he was facing out there, he was very scared about what was going on. He also said that when Brandon gets excited, that yes, sometimes he was known to stutter or stammer. So it is worth noting that he might be mashing words together in that phone call. Anthony in particular believes that he hears Brandon saying something about someone being tasered. He hears the word taser happening in the 911 call. So I just wanted to mention that. They spoke only about a week before Brandon went missing. And once again, he's noting Kyle and Brandon were inseparable. And he says one of the things that Brandon told him was that one of the greatest things that Brandon had ever done with his life was having his children. I don't believe this is a man that would leave those kids behind. Anthony also wanted to point out in terms of the first video that his experience with feral hogs is a bit different. They can be extremely intimidating and aggressive, and when you come upon one, they're usually not alone. Not that they necessarily travel in packs, but there's usually 2 or 3 that are close by. So there is some potential in that feral hog story that I mentioned the first time around. Another theory that Anthony spoke about is the fact that there have been 2 or 3 other men within about a 6-month period of Brandon's disappearance who also worked at oil fields that went disappearing, and that is there potentially some type of human trafficking cartel taking oil field workers in particular maybe to Mexico to work for free. I'm not certain, but it is a theory that we spoke about. He also gave me the breakdown on all of Brandon's children. Mackenzie, the oldest, that was with the woman from the prior relationship. Destiny, Nolan, and Whitney. And it was great to hear their voices in the background of the phone call when I was on the phone with Ledessa. just kind of reminds you that that this guy, even with him currently missing, that he's made an imprint on this world, not only with having those children, but with his story being told. He's definitely made an imprint on me, and it was an honor for me to, first of all, hear the kind words that the family had to say to me, but to also trust me with being able to ask them questions, gain this new insight, and share it with all of you. This is a family that is still grieving, and they could definitely use more help. And I hope that the BrainScratch community is a part of that. Any of you that are in Texas, please look up the Facebook page. Check out the Missing Brandon Lawson page. Be sure to have that guy's image stuck in your head. And maybe even join one of the candlelight vigils or balloon releases that they have scheduled coming up. And outside of all that, send a huge dose of hope to Ledessa for when this does hit the cold case files, that hopefully we'll get some fresh eyes on this. Maybe a new department will pick it up. Maybe we'll get some momentum and finally see some movement on some searches happening. Maybe those landowners can do the right thing and sign some waivers and let some people search their land. There's just so much that can be done around this, and this woman with a full-time job and 3 kids is spearheading it on her own. And if that doesn't inspire you, I don't know what the hell will. I hope you have an excellent weekend. Thank you for joining me on this edition of BrainScratch. I will catch you next week on the Geek and Dorks channel. Take care.